You know how sometimes, when you're a kid, you're told that certain things are just your imagination? Your parents, teachers, and friends always tell you that. But as I got older, I started wondering if that's all it was. Was it really just my imagination that made me feel like someone was watching me? Or was there something darker at play? It started with a doll. I had this doll when I was younger, a porcelain figure with glassy blue eyes that seemed just too big for its face. I never liked it, not even for a second, but it was a gift from my grandmother, though I didn't really have a choice but to keep it in my room. I remember the way it felt, the way the doll's glassy stare followed me no matter where I went in the room. Its frilly dress, its perfect little shoes, everything about it was just wrong. I'd push it to the back of the shelf in the corner of my room, trying to pretend it wasn't there. But every night, as I drifted off to sleep, I'd swear I heard it. A faint click of porcelain against wood, like it was moving, like it was shifting ever so slightly from its spot. The idea made my skin crawl, but I'd tell myself it was just the wind, or the house settling. Nothing to worry about, right? Years passed, and I grew up. The doll stayed in that corner, untouched. I'd often wonder why my grandmother had given it to me. She'd passed away when I was a teenager, but I couldn't bring myself to get rid of the thing. So it stayed, gathering dust and quietly watching, or at least, that's how it felt. Then one day, when I was in my early 20s, I was home alone. My parents had gone away for the weekend, and I was cleaning the house when I decided to sort through some old boxes in the attic. I hadn't been up there in a while, but I thought it would be good to clear out some clutter, get rid of old toys, and maybe finally tackle the box of old keepsakes my parents had stored for me. I wasn't expecting anything strange, just an afternoon of cleaning and maybe finding some old memories. As I opened the attic door, the stale, dusty air hit me. It was that smell you get when something's been closed off for a long time. I turned on the light, and it flickered for a second before steadying. The room was packed with old boxes. Some were marked with my name. Some were labeled in my mom's handwriting. And then, I saw it. On a shelf in the far corner, there was a doll. Not just any doll. The same porcelain doll I had in my room. How? I must have stared at it for a good minute, confused and frozen in place. I hadn't moved it, I was sure about that. I hadn't touched it in years, let alone taken it up to the attic. It had just appeared there. My heart started pounding. Maybe I'd forgotten it up there as a kid? I tried to rationalize it, but my gut told me something was very wrong. I took a deep breath, and for some reason, I felt compelled to approach it. When I touched the doll, my skin crawled. Its porcelain skin was cold to the touch, colder than it should have been, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the way its eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but no, those glossy eyes were moving, slowly, following my every motion. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I slowly backed away. I don't know why I didn't just leave then. I guess some part of me thought I could handle it, that I could take the doll back downstairs and put it in a box and forget about it. But that didn't happen. When I turned around to head back down, I felt something touch my shoulder. A cold, bony hand gripped my shoulder from behind. I whirled around, but there was nothing but the doll, sitting there, still staring at me. The house felt heavier after that, more oppressive, like I was being suffocated by something invisible. I didn't go back up into the attic for weeks, but I started noticing things, small things, like how, in the middle of the night, I would hear faint creaking, like footsteps walking across the floor of my room, or how my bedroom door would creak open by itself when I was trying to sleep. I would wake up in the mornings to find the doll in a different position than where I'd left it. Sometimes it would be facing the bed, other times it would be staring at the door. I tried to tell myself I was just paranoid, but the fear kept building. Then one night, something happened that I can't explain. I woke up to the sound of a soft, whispering voice. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. I thought I was dreaming at first, but then it came again. "Come closer," it whispered. "Come closer." I shot up in bed, my heart racing. My room was dark except for the faint light of the street lamp outside, and in the corner, the doll was sitting there, facing me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the soft, almost imperceptible movement of its head, slowly turning toward me. My blood ran cold. I don't remember much after that. I remember grabbing the doll, shoving it into a box, and running out of the house. I didn't stop until I reached the woods at the edge of town. I don't know why I chose to bury it there. Maybe I thought it would be gone forever. Maybe I just wanted to put an end to it. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there somewhere, waiting, watching. I swear, sometimes when I'm alone, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, just for a second. Something small, something watching me from the shadows. I don't know if you believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural, but what happened to me, well, I'm still not sure how to explain it. It all started a few years ago when my wife and I decided to visit an old estate sale. It was out in the country, a few hours away from our city, in this old Victorian house that had been abandoned for decades. The family who owned it had passed away, and now the house was filled with forgotten relics, antiques, and oddities that nobody had bothered to touch for years. You know the type of estate sale I'm talking about, the ones where everything seems off. We were just browsing, poking around to see what we could find, when I saw it. A dollhouse. And not just any dollhouse, but the most elaborate, most detailed dollhouse I'd ever seen. It looked like something out of a museum, tiny little rooms with wallpaper and intricate furniture, all painted by hand. But what stood out the most was the little family inside. Tiny porcelain dolls, all dressed in vintage clothes. A mother, father, and 2 children. They were lifelike in a way that made me uncomfortable, especially the eyes. The eyes were just too real, too deep, too human. I didn't think much of it at first. It was an old dollhouse, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. But then, I saw the name written on the small tag attached to the house. The Harper Family Dollhouse. I should have walked away right then and there, but for some reason, I couldn't. I bought the dollhouse for a few $100, thinking it would be a nice addition to our collection of antiques. We brought it home, and I set it up in our living room. It felt strange, though. Every time I walked past it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was like the dolls were staring at me, watching me. Even when I wasn't looking directly at them, I could feel their eyes on me. The first night, things took a turn. I woke up in the middle of the night, hearing a faint sound coming from the living room. I thought it was just the house creaking, but the sound kept getting louder, like tiny footsteps, the kind you'd hear if someone were walking around in soft slippers. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and went into the living room. The dollhouse was sitting on the shelf, just like it had been earlier, but when I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the dolls, the mother, was gone. There was no sign of her, just an empty space where she had been. I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it had fallen off the shelf, or maybe I'd misplaced her while cleaning. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. That wasn't the only thing that felt wrong. I could smell something. An old, musty scent. Like rotting wood. It was coming from the dollhouse. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. The dolls would shift positions when I wasn't around. Sometimes I'd come home and find one of them moved to a different room. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was messing with them. One night, I decided to investigate. I stayed up late, sitting in the dark, watching the dollhouse. It was almost as if it was waiting for me to fall asleep. Then, in the dead of night, I saw it. The father doll moved. just a little at first. His hand twitched, and then his head turned slowly, like he was looking directly at me. I could see his glass eyes glimmer in the moonlight. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the dollhouse, shoved it into the attic, and locked the door. I didn't sleep for days after that, but one night, when I was trying to relax, I heard it again. The footsteps. Faint, soft, and growing louder. When I went upstairs to check the attic, the door was wide open. The dollhouse was gone. I've never seen it since, but every now and then, when I'm alone, I swear I hear the sound of tiny footsteps following me. I'll never forget that night, the night I bought the doll at that creepy auction. I've been a collector for years, vintage toys, rare finds, oddities. I've spent countless weekends at auctions, estate sales, and antique shops, hunting for the perfect piece to add to my collection. Most people think it's weird, but for me, it's just a passion. There's something about the history, the nostalgia, and the stories these old objects hold that fascinates me. But that night, I learned that some things should never be collected. It was late, a Thursday evening, when I heard about the auction. One of the dealers I frequently talked to mentioned a special auction happening in an old warehouse downtown. The description sounded strange, but intriguing, the kind of event that promised strange, rare items that never hit the mainstream market. Of course I had to go. The thrill of finding something unique was too tempting to pass up. The warehouse was tucked away on a quiet street, far from the city's main roads. I almost missed it, but then I saw the flickering lights coming from inside the building. It was an old, forgotten place. Peeling walls, crooked windows, and the smell of damp wood and dust. There wasn't any sign outside, just a small handwritten note taped to the door that said, "Auction tonight." I stepped inside, immediately hit by the musky air and the dim lighting. The room was vast, but it felt claustrophobic, like the walls were closing in. The auctioneer, an older man with a weathered face, stood on a raised platform, and a small crowd was gathered around him in a half circle. The shelves around the room were stacked with old antiques, paintings, furniture, lamps, and everything in between. I was already scanning the room, evaluating potential finds, when something caught my eye. It was a doll, placed on a pedestal at the far end of the room, as if it were waiting for me. It wasn't just any doll, it was porcelain, with delicate features, but the kind of doll that made your skin crawl at first glance. Her hair was dark and glossy, cascading in perfect waves down her back. Her face was painted with unnerving perfection, an innocent expression that somehow felt off, like something was hiding beneath it. But what really got me were her eyes. They were an unsettling shade of green, bright and lifelike, as though they were staring directly into your soul. I couldn't look away. There was something almost magnetic about her. She stood there, frozen, as though daring anyone to take her home. The auctioneer began to speak, and I realized the bidding had started. My heart skipped a beat. No one else seemed interested, I noticed. The crowd was mostly focused on other items, but I couldn't take my eyes off of her. Without thinking, I raised my hand, and just like that, I was bidding on her. I didn't even know why. Something deep inside me urged me to have her. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and she was mine. I wasn't sure if I felt thrilled or uneasy, but I told myself I'd made the right choice. She was beautiful, rare, and no one else had bid on her. The auctioneer handed me the doll, wrapped carefully in an old piece of cloth, and I took her home. At first, she seemed like any other addition to my collection. I set her up on a shelf in my living room, next to some of the other toys and antiques I'd gathered over the years. But even as I arranged her, I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. She didn't belong there. Not in my collection, not in my home. But I shrugged it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. That night, I placed her carefully in front of the window. It was dark outside, and the faint glow of streetlights filtered through the curtains. porcelain doll sat on the shelf, looking out at the empty street. For some reason, I felt as though she was watching me. I tried to sleep, but something gnawed at me. I tossed and turned in bed, the sense of unease growing heavier by the second. I kept thinking I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I closed my eyes, just to reopen them, and find that she hadn't moved at all, but something felt off. Then, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a soft scratching sound. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, like someone was gently tapping porcelain against wood. I froze in bed, trying to place the sound. At first, I convinced myself it was the house settling, an old building, creaky floorboards. Nothing to worry about. But the scratching continued, and with each passing moment, it grew louder. It sounded as if someone was gently tapping the doll's porcelain hand against the edge of the shelf. My heart began to race. I couldn't tell if I was imagining things, or if there was something truly wrong. I got out of bed, my legs feeling like jelly, as I walked to the living room. The doll was still in place, perched on the shelf, but the scratching had stopped. For a moment, I stood there, waiting, listening. Nothing. I took a deep breath, brushing off the paranoia that was starting to settle in. I turned to head back to my room, but before I could reach the door, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. The doll's head had moved. Not much, just a subtle shift, but enough that I noticed it. I could feel my pulse quickening. I wasn't imagining things. I was certain of it now. Her head was turned just slightly to the left, as though she had been watching me leave the room. I quickly turned on the living room light. The doll was still there, sitting in the same spot. But now the unease in the pit of my stomach had grown into something darker. I stared at her for a moment longer, my mind racing. Had I moved her? No. She was still in the same exact spot I had left her in. I had to be imagining things. I told myself it was just late, and I needed sleep. I went back to bed, trying to push the thoughts from my mind, but the unease lingered, like a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing small noises, scratches, like tiny fingernails on porcelain, but each time I would get up to check, the doll was exactly where I had left her. The next day, I tried to go about my normal routine, but something felt different. I noticed a strange, almost musty odor in the house. It wasn't overpowering, but it was there, lingering, like something had been left in the room for too long. I searched the house, trying to find the source of the smell, but there was nothing. Nothing, except for the doll. And then it happened. The second night after I brought her home, I woke up again, this time to the sound of soft, deliberate footsteps. I didn't need to check the clock to know it was 3 a.m. The footsteps were coming from the living room. I was terrified. I froze in bed. The steps weren't random. They were slow, paced, like someone walking carefully across the floor. I grabbed my flashlight and crept out of bed. The light flickered when I turned it on, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I moved cautiously down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the living room, the flashlight illuminated the shelf. The doll was gone. I panicked. I turned in circles, scanning the room, the hallway, and that's when I heard it, a soft, gentle whisper from behind me. "I've been waiting for you." I spun around, flashlight in hand, my breath catching in my throat. The doll was standing in the doorway, looking at me. Her eyes glowed in the dim light, piercing through me as if they could see right into my soul. Her head had turned fully toward me now, her tiny porcelain hand lifted, as if it was beckoning me to follow. I don't know how I got the courage, but I moved toward her. My legs felt like they were made of stone, heavy and unyielding. Every step I took, I could feel the air growing colder around me, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I reached for her, my fingers trembling as I took hold of her tiny porcelain wrist, and that's when it hit me. There was something wrong with her, something inhuman. The doll's hand was ice cold, but the rest of her body felt unnervingly warm, like it was alive. I pulled back, but her tiny fingers curled around mine, tighter than I thought possible. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the grip loosened. She dropped back to the floor with a soft thud, as if nothing had happened at all. I don't remember running, but I was outside, sitting in my car, shivering in the cold. I couldn't go back inside. I couldn't. The next day, I took the doll to the nearest antique dealer, hoping someone could explain what had happened. The dealer looked at me strangely when I handed her the doll, as if she had seen something I hadn't. "You need to get rid of that," she said, her voice low. "That doll has been passed around for years. It's not just a collector's item. It's a curse." She wouldn't tell me more, just that the doll needed to be destroyed. I didn't believe her at the time, but I wasn't taking any chances. I don't know where the doll is now. I left her with the dealer, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that whisper. "I've been waiting for you."